institutions are dead, how are we to live in the face of the death of our institutions in our global society? Let's take a quick look at the fundamental institutions of civilization. Let us start with marriage. Marriage as an institution is dead. We'll consider the dynamics of this death. But for now, let us list the basic institutions. Marriage is dead. The state, government, the nation is dead. We'll see how this works. The church, religion if you like, is dead. Schools, the institution of education, is dead. And finally, what we often call business or jobs, sometimes the economy, that is dead. Now let us bracket for a second the content of these propositions. What if these institutions were dead? What if in the global open society these institutions were merely nominally there, but in fact, in reality, their content was no longer there? Well, evidently, an appeal to the institutions at that point, in the context of a global society, would be pointless, would be a way to masquerade the absence. It would be a way to cover up the death, feeding into the murder, the killer of the institutions. Now let us consider these institutions one by one. In what sense would, let us speak in the conditional, would the institution of marriage be dead? Well, we have to consider the context of the death. The context is the global society. Now, the global society does not need traditional institutions. These are institutions tied to the closed society. The open society seeks to open up, to speak euphemistically, these institutions. So it contextualizes them in a way that sucks all the content out of the institutions. Okay, well, let us get back to the marriage. What happens with marriage? What is the original or natural end function of marriage? Marriage is an institution that generations fought for, that allows authority to be transmitted from, essentially, or paradigmatically, a father to a child. Now, marriage presupposes paternal authority. A marriage without paternal authority, paternal in the respect of the father is the archetypal figure of authority. Paternal authority is the core of a marriage. You get rid of paternal authority and you have no more marriage. How does that work out? Well, it's obvious to many, but we don't need to go into statistics. Divorces, pretenses of marriages, marriages for convenience, the death of paternal authority, and paternal authority is condemned to death by the open society, marks the end of real marriage. This end is manifest to many in the statistics. The ends of marriages, the court legal system in family court, family law, being there to destroy paternal authority. How does that do that? Well, obviously by flattering women. When you get rid of the father, you can access the children and so integrate them in the global open society. So the paternal authority is out of the window. Marriage is dead. You can appeal to marriage as a beautiful institution. You can romanticize about it. You can be a conservative nominally about the institution. It's a beautiful thing. But it's dead. And the reason is old paternal authority is dead. Now you can pretend that it's alive, but in fact the legal system is there to destroy it. Well, let's get to this legal system. The nation, the state. Why would this nation, the state, be dead? Well, in the open society, clearly, the authority of a Senate is no longer there. The Senate is there trying to grapple with situations that are beyond its jurisdiction. It cannot handle phenomena that are determined by geopolitics, global dynamics. So senators are there, and they're baffled. They don't know what to do. So they're, in effect, castrated. They cannot do anything other than bow to the authority of the marketplace, the mercenary forces that are supposed to be guiding us. So, the nation. We can sing a hymn, national anthem. We can pledge allegiance to principles, to a constitution, but the constitution is simply on paper now. It's been subverted. In what context? In the context of a global society. It's been historicized, the meaning has been obscured, whoever appeals to the original meaning is considered bad. You could say even the enemy of a state, right? Which is to say of the global society. So, bigot, fascist. So, the nation is dead. You can appeal to it, and it sounds pretty, but mostly you'll be nostalgic because, in fact, the autonomy of the nation has been rejected entirely by the globalist ideology, which is the dominant one. So that is dead. The nation is dead. Now, what about the church? Well, the appeal to God is very marketable for the globalist society. You can choose your God. We have a marketplace of religions. Of course, you have to be kind and allow others to express their own religious views. Or you can be a terrible bigot, and you can be branded as such. And again, you become the enemy of the regime. The church must be dead. Imagine a church that took itself seriously and thus that tied itself to the classical notion of God the Father, and whose authority is reflected in the earthly father. And so that ties in with the institution of marriage, which is dead. And of course, the nation, Moses, that's dead. What is the church there for? Well, the church is now there to have people hope for the best in the face of necessary evils. The necessary evils that, well, the suffering that are inherent in the global society. So we are free to profess our own religion. We're free to choose our own God. God cannot choose us. He cannot choose us to contradict the dictates of the global society. The only true God at present must be one that tells you to collaborate. If there's a God that tells you not to collaborate, that must be an old God, something that is no good. Was recently in a church where the priest tells everyone that there's a difference between the God of the Hebrews of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Testament, and the Christian God, the God of the Gospels. And the difference is 1,000 years. 3,000 years ago, we have savage tribal people, and the God of wrath is speaking to them. And now we have more civilized people, and God speaks as the God of love. Let's all love out each other. So we have evolved. So now we have evolved, and our God tells us, that we should all embrace each other. And so then there's a moment where everybody's in church is supposed to, greet those around them. And what do? They have somewhat of an extraterrestrial salutation. You're face to face, and yet you don't have the courage to shake a hand. And there's a Spock type of hi, and yet you're face to face. Let us all be kind and respect each other without impinging upon each other's autonomy and freedom in a bubble. So all of this is a facade, it's a farce, and it shows the vacuity of the whole institution. And you can go on with myriads of examples. So the church is dead. And now, what about schools? Oh, schools. Schools are essentially instruments of the regime. So they aim at integrating students, children, in the system. It matters not at all if the children will be dumb as hell. It matters not as long as they can follow basic rules. And eventually we won't need to follow the rules at all, because the computers will have us follow the rules. So we won't need to understand the basic rules. We'll just be flesh for the machine. And more we are treated that way. Numbers, much as in a death camp in the Second World War. So follow the rules and regulations, and children are taught to essentially prepare for a bleak version of Brave New World. And now finally, business, the economy, jobs. It used to be that people would think of jobs as the working as a means to freedom. And it turns out that in the global society, it is a means to enslave, to keep people slaves. So You can give, again, countless examples of how this situation has been transformed, subverted radically. Bureaucratization of work, uh, everything functioning according to alien demands, expectations, regulations, taxation. It's just, and of course, the closure of positions, everything mediated, hyper-mediated, technological mediation. If you apply for a so-called job, in all likelihood, your CV, whatever you present to stand for yourself, will not even be considered by a human being, but just by a machine. And when you obtain the job, what are you essentially doing? You're serving the marketplace, the global society, and you're entirely expendable because you're working for a machine, not for a human being, really. I mean, locally it may look like it, but not in the. If you extend your view to a context that is beyond the immediate proximity. So the machine finds you entirely expendable. You were simply a peg, replaceable, and there are legions of other little pegs that can replace you. So, freedom? Not really. Then when you obtain a certain amount of money that you will not do in an honest way, in other words, by following the rules, then what happens? Assuming that you obtain a certain amount of money, well, you are obliged to function more and more because of the exposure that you gain by rising further up in the social ladder. You will be obliged to function according to the dictates of the regime. So you find yourself entrapped more and more and living ever more under compulsion. Your private life is shrinking now until it disappears. Right. So work to be free? No longer. Work as a means to enslavement. That is the case. Now we can, of course, appeal to old ideals, but in the present context, those old ideals are just that. You can be nostalgic about them, but the reality today is the opposite. So marriage is dead. The nation is dead. The church is dead. Religion is dead. You can have the pretense. You can have the facade. And that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's even better because it covers up the death. The schools are dead. School means, in the original sense, means scolaire is leisure. And school is all but leisure today. It's the opposite of leisure. Keeping you busy so that you don't think, so that you don't ask questions about meaning. The question of meaning is dead. So ideology kicks in, propaganda is all rampant. What's the alternative? There's sometimes appeal to individualism. My individual, that falls apart immediately. The Cartesian individual is simply part of the machine. So we could get into that discussion some other time, but this is the stage. So what do we do? How do we live in the face of the death of institutions? So we can be conservatives and appeal to them, pretending that they're still there, or we can be progressives and cherish their demise and embrace the global whoredom of the planetary open society. In both cases, we have a rather complete eclipse of the natural end of institutions. And here's the point, which is really a biblical point, one that one can glean from a study of the story of Noah's Ark, of the situation in old Sodom, and by studying the Gospels, the Christian Gospels. There comes a point where you face a crisis of the institutions. Now, in our times, in our age, this crisis has taken up a weight, a scope, a depth that is unprecedented. And this because of the modern revolution, Cartesian, Machiavellian, and ultimately technological revolution that has made it possible to establish a global open society that is essentially a subversion of all closed or real societies. So it's a virtual society. And when you have the crisis of institutions in the closed society, of course, you can have external forces that help overcome the crisis. So it's not a radical crisis. In our case, in our present case, we have a radical crisis of the institutions. And there's no outer barbarians coming in, but they're all part of the same crisis. So there's no outside. In the global society, by definition, there's no outside. It's totalistic, if not totalitarian, in intent. So, how are we to live in this situation? Well, first of all, most of us will not escape the black hole. We'll be sucked into it. The only way out is the life of reflection on the natural ends of institutions, which is pretty much the message of the Gospels. You have to transcend the institution of the family. So there's even the call to hate your father, your mother, and so forth. Why? Does Jesus call, the character Jesus in the Gospels, call us Christians to hate our parents, our brothers and sisters, and so forth? Literally, it does. But in what context? Well, in the context of the death of an institution. We need to recover the natural end of that institution, the source within human nature. But what nature? Not the corrupt nature, of course, but a nature that is presupposed by the corrupt nature. So, a nature that is manifest in Jesus Christ. Right. But to do this, we must turn. There must be an apostrophe, a conversion. We must turn to an introspective life, to a life of reflection. So our compulsion to move outwardly toward the contents of our consciousness is to yield to a life of return. How is this possible? It's to turn on itself and die. So I must die to myself. No longer I live, but Christ, the Logos, lives in me, says St. Paul. And this is a way to say that the true life is a life of reflection. That a life of the senses that turn back upon their own source, and so that somehow negate themselves and thereby exposing themselves in their negation. They expose themselves to their source. And so we're nourished by that eternal water that is the truth about the institutions. Now, we will be witnessing the collapse of the institutions. Those who appeal to them nostalgically are merely covering up the phenomenon. But embracing the death is madness, of course, in a progressive way, is madness. So either way, we are doomed. The only way out for us, for the remnant, for the few who do take that path, who are touched by the Logos, by the Word, the living Word, the only way out is the life of reflection, giving up, letting go of the compulsions, and trusting that there is a divine safety net, if only one that manifests itself through the cross. So, looking backward, we gain our true strength independent of the approbation, the license provided by the globalist regime. Our strength, our true strength, will be then well grounded. At this point, we will be best placed to answer to the Christ, to respond to the death of institutions and the murder of the institutions. The murder of the church, the murder of marriage, of the nation, of work, of course, of schools, of education. So this is the task that we are faced with. Those few who will respond to the challenge will be saved. The others will join the party, and they will disappear in God's own forgetfulness.